All right. Good evening, NYC and NJ and DMV campus ministries. It's so great to see all of you and to be together on this special night. So, just thank you again for being here, for taking out the time. This is super encouraging, even just seeing the fellowship before we got going tonight. But thank you, Jackson and Julia, for welcoming us. And, my wife, Hannah, and I have been really looking forward to this time together and are so grateful to be able to partner up with the DMV campus ministries. Outside of COVID ministry, normally we couldn't do a Friday night event like this or quite like this because of distance, obviously. We wouldn't usually be able to be together till an ICMC or something like that. So it's super encouraging to be together as one and to get inspired together. I do want to say that we're so grateful for Noah and Patty Mata and our friendship with them and just our partnership in the gospel and doing life together. We just love serving alongside both of you in the kingdom. And if you didn't know this, Noah and I have been close friends for some time now. Throw a picture up here. This picture was taken in 2015, which was the first of 3 summers in which we served on full-time staff together at Campo for Kids right outside of Philadelphia. And man, we made some great memories. This picture was taken from a teen camp skit that we put on, which honestly we could barely get through without laughing hysterically on stage. It was awesome. But in all seriousness, I'm so grateful for that time being able to serve together. And then obviously seeing Patty come into Noah's life and being able to serve all together at camp there for a bit. But anyways, fast forward now to 2021. Just a couple months ago, my wife and I got some time with the Matas. And, we were just sharing about the past year, about 2020, and what our cities had gone through. And so we took some time just processing all that was going on and just thinking about, man, what is our role in it? And so we actually visited the Matas just a couple days after the riots at the Capitol. And so the events of the Capitol and just everything going on were fresh on our hearts at that time. And so we decided, moving on from that time together, we decided we should do a special event together and plan something that could be both inspiring and bonding for the campus ministries. And so here we are tonight, April 2021, on the heels of 2020, which is quite the year and all that took place. And so obviously it's clear to all of us that our nation as a whole has been through a lot this past year. But NYC and the Capitol have been hotspots for sure. The rest of the country has turned on the news to see what's happening in these specific areas of our nation. Early on in the pandemic, New York City had become the worst affected area in the country. There were over 2,000 deaths by April 6, 2020 at that stage. The city had more confirmed coronavirus cases than China, the UK, or Iran, and it only grew worse from there. To date, in New York City alone, over 31,500 people have died from COVID-19. And in DC and the DMV area, a couple thousand people have died from COVID. It is encouraging, though, to see more people being vaccinated and to see the numbers obviously changing as we head into the summer here. But New York City and the Capitol and DC were not only epicenters of COVID-19, but also of a cry for social justice and for racial justice. Protests, riots, political unrest, violence, and much pain were reminiscent of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. And after the murders of Rayshard Brooks, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Freddie Gray, and many more, people everywhere were awakened even more so to the brokenness of our world and its systems, to the sin of racism and it being evident in our communities. And just when we thought the year 2020 ending would end the pain and the heartache along with it. In DC, we experienced the violent Capitol riots, which were shocking at the beginning of January 2021, just days before the inauguration of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And all of you that are on this call tonight witnessed this all happen before your very eyes as you processed, as you grieved, and asked yourself, what should I do as a Christian? What should my response be? And this is the question that we've been asking a lot over the past year and some change. And when it comes down to it, we see now more than ever that all people are made in the image of God, because we see people wanting justice, fairness, unity, and peace. God desires change in the human heart. He desires justice, mercy, healing. And so do we, because he made us that way. God's heart breaks over what has gone down in these two major cities, but does yours? Does your heart break? And so the question is, so what now, right? What can we do as followers of Jesus to help bring healing and hope to our communities, to these cities? What role will we play as a young people in the narrative of the future of these cities? You know, Noah and I have some thoughts to share from a passage in Luke 19, and we hope this message inspires you and really brings you hope. So let's look here in Luke chapter 19. Obviously, you can see the scriptures up on the screen here. Starting in verse 44, it says, as he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace, but now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you. So you see, Jesus was full of compassion. He embodied the compassion of God. Psalm 116 verse 5 says, the Lord is gracious and righteous. Our God is full of compassion. God is full of compassion, so therefore Jesus is full of compassion. We see that here in this moment as he looks over the city of Jerusalem. And in this moment, Jesus weeps over Jerusalem, because even the people of God are being blinded to the way of peace, being Jesus. And so for Jesus, just the sight of this city triggered his heart to be moved over its lostness. That's really powerful. God's heart breaks over the blindness of his children, his image bearers. God weeps when people are blinded to the person of Christ and his way of doing life. Just go with me here for a moment. Just picture this for a moment. Imagine you and some disciples go to a high up lookout spot where you can look over the NYC skyline or the DC area. And as you're with a couple disciples, you yourself, you just start weeping and you're moved and you're brought to tears. You start crying in front of your friends. So your friends ask you, bro, sis, why are you crying? And you can barely get a word out. But you say in response to your friends, if this city could only know what could bring them peace, if they could only know Jesus. I mean, that would be a powerful moment right there, right? Your compassion would inspire those disciples around you, and it would be a memorable moment. It might sound kind of like, that sounds crazy, but Jesus, that's what's happening in this moment as he heads into Jerusalem. When's the last time you cried over the lostness of your city? Now, I'm not saying we all need to be criers or totally lose it, but when's the last time your heart was moved after realizing how in need of God your city is? When's the last time your heart broke for what breaks God's. I'm sure we've all had those moments over the past year and some change where we've had that heartbreak. Personally, I've had to ask myself, does my heart break? Is my heart being moved to compassion? Is it being moved to action? And for being honest, guys, it's so easy to go about our lives, our daily to-dos, our schedules, our hobbies, work, playing video games, doing schoolwork, and to not take moments out of our lives to pause and let our hearts be moved, to stop and to see the needs, not just see them, but as Jesus does here in this passage, to feel them within ourselves. I once heard it said in a sermon, here's a practical thing that you can do is when you're out sharing your faith on campus or in your city, walk slowly. Take it in. As you watch people pass, think about this, that they are souls, they are human beings whom Jesus deemed worthy of dying for, bleeding out for, and resurrecting for. Jesus took moments to recognize the hurt and pain and to weep, but do we? When's the last time these moments happened in your life? The killers of compassion are comfort and complacency. The giver of compassion is Jesus Christ. He models that way for us. Before we can bring change to these influential cities, we need to let the compassion of Christ influence our hearts, inspire our hearts, and move us. I think it's fair to say that we all want change, right? We all want to bring hope to these cities. We all want to start with ourselves, but we have to look within ourselves and ask God to break our hearts for what breaks his. Because compassion is the birthplace of world change. We must genuinely look inward before we can act outward. Only then can God use us and mobilize us effectively to bring the gospel to our areas and to bring his kingdom, which is what we all want. And so Noah is now going to talk about this kind of next step, about taking action and how we can bring hope and preach the gospel and alter the future of these cities that we're living in. So he's going to take us through kind of the next part of this passage. I'll pass it over to you, bro.
Awesome. Bro, thank you so much, Mark, even just for teeing us off. I feel honored to speak tonight. It's funny when I think about just how important it is for us to do this. Honestly, without us doing these collaborations, to be honest, our world becomes so much smaller. And this is just such a special treat. If you're a guest with us, guys, you're only really scratching the surface of just how deep the connection of God's kingdom is. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be with New York. For those of you who don't know, I actually was born in New York. I was born in Brooklyn. So BK, where y'all at? Maybe you're in here. Oh, let's go. I have a deep affinity and deep gratitude for New York. My parents became Christians in the Rockland County church when I was 5. And then we went through a whole gamut of things, but I'm just so grateful for just the faith of you guys. And honestly, without you guys, and even though some of you are probably have never been around when my parents was reached out to, but maybe your parents and maybe people that you were praying for, or people that were praying for us were the reasons why that we're here. So, but I always joke around with Mark. He probably feels uncomfortable with this, but this is my conviction that if Jesus was a white man in 2021, he would probably be Marc Persing. I'm gonna let that sit. Such a good man. But to be real, that's the energy we all need. Jesus's plan for the world to see him and to know he's there, believe it or not, and also whether you like it or not, it's us. So that one's a freebie. But let's keep going. We're gonna continue in Luke chapter 19 and verse 45. I promise I won't go long. I put my timer on. So, obviously we saw that Jesus's heart was moved to compassion when he saw the city at large. But as he walked to the city and walked through the city, as it goes. Paul did the same thing in his missionary journeys. He goes straight to the temple. So here we're going to see a memory maybe some of you guys have of Jesus. This is the part of Jesus that helped me see that it is okay to be angry. But in verse 45, this is what Jesus did. When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. It is written, he said to them, my house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers. That's hot fire, table flipping right there, right? The John account actually talks about this idea that, when his disciples saw him get angry, they remembered the psalmist prophesying in Psalm 69:9, zeal for your house will what? Consume me. So I did some kind of digging. It's funny. Oftentimes when we read this, it's almost like, did Jesus have a temper, or did he have a temple tantrum, right? But as we look at even that idea of zeal for your house will consume me, here are the Hebrew roots, right? Zeal. The Hebrew root is jealous, which jealous is more than a Nick Jonas song, right? Jealous is basically, it's the idea that, wow, like God was actually jealous. He was, but also consumed. The Hebrew root of that is literally to be eaten. So let me ask you this. Are you being eaten by your jealousy? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to ask you that question. But seriously, it sounds ridiculous when you think about that question, right? But, it probably would be a hard no, like, yeah, I'm not being eaten by my jealousy, if we exclusively thought about that phrase in our cultural context. But think about this. As we note the heart of Jesus in earlier verses, we know that he's what? Compassionate. We know that his heart breaks for the hopeless and those consumed by the facade of hope in other things, right? So not just the disenfranchised, but actually Jesus's heart broke for the dignitary as well. I think oftentimes it's easy for our hearts to break for those who can't help themselves, but the ones who can help themselves, it's not easy to look at them as helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, right? But you put all of those pieces together as the only one, Jesus being the only one who could provide everlasting freedom. Here's the reality. He's eaten by the reality of jealousy for them, not of them. That Jesus was jealous for these people, not of these people. You get that? He isn't envious of their position, their circumstance, their power, their property. He's jealous that their hearts aren't in his house. And if their hearts aren't in his house, they are rotting in superficial filth. They are rotting on the outside of his house where there is no safety, where there is no security, where there is no compassion, but there is only death. So here's the big idea. When you think about what's next, this is where we got to go. This is our actionable. Here's the big idea. Flipping tables isn't a frivolous moment of frustration for Jesus. It's a conscious, Christ-like call for holiness. In other words, Jesus was not having a temple tantrum, but he was opening a door for a house of healing. I'll say that again. Jesus was not having a temple tantrum, but he was doing this. He flipped these tables. He was angry. Why? Because he wanted everyone to have access to a house of healing. Amen? So let me ask you this. What consumes you? When you think about your jealousy, are you jealous for those around you, or are you jealous of them? Jesus was jealous for people. Why? Because he wanted their hearts to be in his home. What about you? Are you jealous for people or of people? I'm going to be honest, I'm jealous of people very naturally. I mean, when I think about people that have things that I don't, right? Or people that seem like they've got it all together, right? It's so easy to be jealous of those people. But if that's where we are, we really don't know what we got. And I'd actually question, if you're not consumed by this idea of jealousy for people, then I don't think the house of God is what you find zeal in. So the answer to this question will expose if your table flipping moments are for him or for yourself. So why do I bring this up? Honestly, right now, when we think about even DC, right? Our proximity to all of these social justice issues, I mean, it's the most polarizing place. It's interesting because you think about, I mean, every time election season comes up here, we know it. We know what's happening. And oftentimes what happens is we see these houses being brought up, right? And you think about the house divided, it's so funny. I mean, Congress is the most polarizing place in the world. I mean, it's a party system. It's literally built on division. And when you think about that, oftentimes for us, we can feel like that culture can actually seep into the church instead of us seeping in to congressional culture, right? And because of that happening, there's this perpetual cycle of imprisonment by our own sin. So I'm going to give you 3 ways to ensure your table flipping isn't a temple tantrum, but a house of healing. 3 ways, 3 simple ways. So the first one is be holy, not in a hole. Be holy, not in a hole. You know, Groundhog Day, right? Groundhog Day is hilarious, right? It's literally a whole town in Puxatawny, Pennsylvania. They all, meet up there and wait for this literal like groundhog to come out, right? But I always wondered, what is the groundhog doing for the rest of the year? Like you just hiding out here, like in the world. Like the reality is we don't know, and the groundhog is probably just living his own dandy life. I love the fact that Mark brought up the whole idea of comfort. I actually think, yeah, if I was a groundhog, I'd like to stay in comfortability inside this hole. Here's the reality. Oftentimes we think holiness means staying in your hole, being away from everything else, being separate from everything else. I'm here to correct that. All right. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15. It says this. You can even look on your own time. Let's do the classic Bible flip. Some of you probably actually get there before I do, because I got to flip it. You know what I'm saying? No, it's okay. I'm a big fan and proponent of electronic phones. Okay. All right. Chapter 1, verse 15, sorry. It says this. It says, but just as he who called you is holy, so be holy in all you do. For it is written, be holy because I am holy. That word holy, it actually does mean to be set apart. You yourself are actually sanctioned to be sacred like Jesus. But here's what's interesting. And even thinking about the context of 1 Peter, he's right. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 15. The context of 1 Peter is that he's writing to disciples that are literally on the cusp of being made a public spectacle in a Roman Colosseum for their death. So essentially, he's not actually asking them to separate themselves from danger. He's actually helping them posture themselves the right way, that in everything you do, right? Notice that's what it said. Be in everything you do, be holy, right? So what does that mean? It actually means that we must conduct ourselves differently than the world does when we deal with the things of this world. It's not like you're not going to deal with the things of this world. But the reality is, no matter what job you get, you're going to be faced with 2 decisions: to conduct yourself in the way that the world does, or to conduct yourself in the way that Jesus does. Doesn't mean that situation is not going to be served like a silver platter on your lap. Amen? All right, secondly is we must have hope for the hopeless. We must have hope for the hopeless. Believe it or not, Jesus did not lose hope in the Pharisees. If he did, he would not have warned them. Think about it. The only reason why Jesus came into the temple in the first place was that he actually wanted to commune with these Pharisees. Every time he went there, it was a dialogue back and forth. He knew that they didn't think they needed him. He knew that. But I think oftentimes what happens is we don't hope for the hopeless, and even hope for those who have their hope placed in the right things. 1 Peter 1:13, just flip a few verses back, right? What does it say? It says, therefore, with minds that are alert and fully sober, set your hope on the grace to be brought to you when Jesus Christ is revealed at his coming. You know, a telltale sign that you're flipping tables out of a temple tantrum is when your hope has run dry. You know, when we talk about, let's talk in-house for a second. If we're talking about the idea of the church and how the church needs to grow. Yes, we do. We are a whole stinking mess, right? But I think oftentimes when we talk about how we need to grow as a church, what we do is we just start complaining. We get to this place of, oh yeah, you know, injustice this and injustice that, which is true in so many ways. But how often are we actually looking for solutions? You know, to be honest, and this could be to my fault, it's very difficult for me to listen to somebody when they don't call for solutions. They just call out the problems. But here's the reality. I think this is a good pill for me to swallow as well, is that, man, how is my hope doing? Because if my hope is run dry, I'm not alert and I'm not sober-minded, so I'm drunk with disappointment. That I'm just drunk with disappointment. That my hope has run dry. There's no way that Jesus can deliver us from any of this. So I'm drunk with disappointment. I'm stumbling. I'm considering things that I probably shouldn't consider. And I'm ready to hang it up. Guys, this must not be. If we're going to flip some tables and if we're going to wake the world up, don't stoop in slumber by your own hopeless, drunken endeavors. Amen. Lastly, is convict with conviction. One of my heroes is Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, if you don't know, please, y'all better know. Nelson Mandela, one of the most celebrated civil rights leaders in our world, was the president of South Africa. But before that, he was in prison for quite some time. He was in prison for crimes he didn't commit. But right when he got out, and right when he was actually able to be an elected official in South Africa, post-apartheid South Africa, he actually was in charge of doing what we know now as reconciliation talks. And what he did was he brought all of the assailants, all of those who were in power, all of the police officials, everybody into the same room and had them confess every wrong misdemeanor that they did, every form of injustice, anything that they did. And his only agreement that he had them have was, when we walk out of these doors, we are forgiven. What the heck? Are you serious? Like, especially when you hear about some of the details of what happened. But man, goodness gracious. Nelson Mandela was such a stalwart example of reconciliation. I mean, don't you know, you and I, if we are disciples of Jesus, we have joined the ministry of reconciliation. If that's not in your mind, then flipping tables is not about him, but it is about you. The way that Nelson flipped tables, it was methodical. It was with the hope of reconciliation. You know, when he was in a position of power, he didn't operate the way his predecessors did, but he modeled the behavior he wanted to normalize. He convicted with conviction. Let me ask you, are you modeling the behavior that you want to normalize? If you're not, that's what you got to start with, that first before you try to get a seat at the table, if that makes sense. So here's the reality. I'm going to end it here. It's okay to start passion projects, right? There are so many, even in our church family, that have been started that might grind your gears. Maybe some of you are like, oh yeah, I'm all about it. Or it might even be doing some more harm than good. But how do you conduct yourself in these matters? Is it with the SpongeBob, I'm a head out kind of posture? You know what I mean? Y'all know the meme. Or is it, I want to learn how to lean in like Jesus kind of posture. Your city needs you. It needs to see what it can become. It needs a jealous God consumed with a guarantor's purchase of property rather than paying rent to a cruel landlord. Is your role in God's story for these cities going to be perpetuating a cycle of apathy, of faithlessness, of complacency, or unrighteous anger? Or is your role going to change the course of the small and big things that set change ablaze in these great cities? You know, God's already writing the story. Let's start telling the tale accurately through our lives. Guys, I'm so grateful. I'm so excited for what goes on here. Guys, it's the little things that count. Even what we're about to do as we go into our a time of fellowship, please don't think that fellowship is just a time to have fun. Actually, fellowship is a time to inspire one another. Even if it is playing a random game of werewolf or mafia, think about it. These are the memories that you need, the bedrock memories that you need to remember that, man, we are the change that we want to see in this world. Amen. But I'm so grateful, especially even to be able to preach alongside one of my heroes. But thank you so much for letting us talk, and to God be the glory.